On today's Locked On Bucks, they snap a 4-game losing streak, but it comes with a very, very costly price. The injury to Giannis, what it means for this team, what to expect in terms of timelines, and anything else that we can parse through and get you up to speed on. Frank and I go through that coming up after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Frank Madden. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts and viewable on YouTube as well, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Frank, there are some things from the game itself I do want to actually address, but I mean, there's no place else to start other than what we saw late in the game, and Giannis exiting late in the third quarter with what the team told us was a soleus injury. And I think everybody immediately Googled, what is that? What muscle is that? I guess I'm curious your initial reaction when you saw it, because we all in the radio booth assumed seeing him grab at the lower leg, and you always hear when it's an Achilles injury, it feels like he got kicked in the back of the leg, and he reached there where that would be, that I think we all kind of assumed, oh crap, this is an Achilles, and that's not only the rest of this year, that is most or all of next year. So I guess there is some minor comfort in it. Hasn't totally been ruled out, but the word we've been given is it's a calf injury. I would caution with that still doesn't mean you're out of the woods.
Yeah, it was just confusing because live on the broadcast, you were there, so you were obviously watching the game. I don't know how much you noticed it as it was happening, but I think they kind of were like cutting away and then cutting to the shot, like right as he kind of went down. So you didn't really in the live broadcast get a sense of exactly what had happened. And so again, I mean, the fact that he was clearly concerned with the way that he immediately went down, right? He wasn't trying to jog it off or anything like that. And on the one hand, it's like calf injuries, hamstring injuries. I mean, it's like the non-contact part is kind of normal, right? Like, I mean, again, if you get physically kicked, that's different. But obviously we've seen guys strain those muscles without, like running into someone or whatever. So honestly, like when he limped off, I was immediately trying to think happy thoughts of, hopefully it's a cramp, right? I mean, you see guys this happen. They go down and seem like incapable of moving, and then a few minutes later they come back. But obviously the longer that he stayed in the locker room and then ultimately didn't come back on the floor or on the bench, right, was indicative of, hey, there's something here. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, honestly, like I think it's only natural for people to think back to, for me, the absolute, low point of my life as a fan of anything, which was seeing him go down in that Hawks game 4 in 2021 and thinking kind of like what you were alluding to, of this idea of like, he's out for this season, the playoff title run is over, and can he even come back next year, right? Like just a double death sentence basically was what that felt like potentially, and just being in suspense for the next 24 hours, right, was awful. With this, obviously, as you alluded to, right, I think there's a much higher degree of confidence that this is not a major injury. Hopefully those are not famous last words that I'm uttering and that we're not proven wrong. But just the proximity to the playoffs is extremely problematic. And, as we've been, I'm sure, Justin, you've been reading it, and many folks probably been reading kind of a lot of the, Twitter doctors, which we say that sometimes pejoratively, of random people trying to speculate on injuries, but, actual people, medical doctors who, have a pretty good track record of analyzing injuries as they happen in sports. And Jeff Stotts, who does In Street Clothes for the NBA, seems like the general consensus is like, yeah, if it's what the Bucks are saying, That's probably a couple week injury in under normal circumstances. And I think the unique situation is that Damian Lillard is basically like the last NBA player to be diagnosed with a soleus specific injury. And he was out, I think, like a couple weeks when he had that a year ago. And he gave some, I think, some very interesting commentary. I know Eric Name and Gabe Stoltz both tweeted out the specific description that Dame gave about, he I think had come back from a calf injury, and then he injured the soleus, and then I think he was out like, I want to say 17 days or something like that. I think missed like 9 games, something like that. So yeah, I mean, it's not a great injury to have regardless, and to have it 11 days from the start of the playoffs. Obviously at this point, like, my assumption is Giannis probably is not available for the start of the playoffs until we find out otherwise. And so, for a team that has had just the most stop-start season that they've had really since, the Bud era began, since they kind of entered this new phase of contention, of course, right? It's only fitting. Giannis has had all these random little niggling injuries, and unfortunately it just feels like, of course, that something like this would have to happen right in a game where the Bucks finally start to look like they have their house in order a little bit. Chris Middleton's back from his mouth trauma. They have a great first half, and then, oh, you like nice things, Justin? Well, sorry, you can't have nice things. Happiness is an illusion. Giannis is hurt.
I mean, we've joked with Doc Rivers, and Eric Name brought it up with him again before the game today. I guess I'll ask you again, how does it feel to have all these guys on the floor? And Doc has pointed out, whenever we get it, something seems to happen. And again, to see it for Giannis is the uber frustrating part of it, as the late Richard Lewis once coined. It's starting to feel like the season from hell for this Bucks team, with just everything that's been piling up. Look, it wasn't a soleus, but Pat Connaughton had a calf injury last year that was 4 or 5 weeks. So we just don't know. And even Doc Rivers' comments after the game, there wasn't a ton of clarity in saying that Giannis was still going to undergo more tests. I know, as you alluded to, the Twitter doctors too, we've seen people kind of reach for that hopium of, well, Giannis walked off and they had footage of him walking out of the arena, so he should be fine. I think this is going to linger just like it did with the finals, where it was basically a week that we were in the dark and not knowing. And it was, a day or two before the finals started. It was that weekend that you started to hear reports of, I think Giannis is going to play. So that's going to be the toughest part, is, not only you win to snap this losing streak, and as we mentioned, the difficulty of trying to project, if we finish 2, here's what it means. If you finish 3rd, here's what it means, because of how bunched up 6, 7, and 8, and really 2 through 5 are. But now the ultimate unknown of, well, who's actually going to be on the floor for this team?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have Giannis for all the first round, I mean, is there some version of the world where you could beat one of those teams in the first round? In normal years, I would say you would have a chance.
Yes.
But in normal years, you don't have the Sixers with Joel Embiid just coming back from an injury, and the Sixers looking much more like they did early in the season. You don't have like the Heat, who are, the perpetual zombie team that just sort of flakes its way through the regular season and then finds, that second gear. So again, like, I'm not going to condemn the Bucks to, any specific fate. But let me say this, like, on some level, it's like it might as well happen this year, where our expectations had already been dampened by what we've seen really over the course of the year, but then especially over the last week. I think we've been emotionally prepared for the Bucks to have their, playoff run short-circuited more so this year. Certainly compared to last year, when, you led the league in wins and you're flying high going into the playoffs, and, you were considered by most to be certainly the Eastern Conference favorites, if not the favorites to win the title. That was, the harshest of reality checks that the Bucks got last year. This year, I think we have had our eyes wide open here, certainly over the last little bit, and really all season long. Like, right, we've kind of been hoping that they would get through things, and just obviously just kind of, as soon as they start to turn a corner, then something happens, whether it's injury or just kind of baffling play. So yeah, probably, I mean, I don't think we can speculate much more on what this means for the playoffs, other than it ain't good. And it certainly casts a shadow over everything that's going to happen between now and the first round of the playoffs. And, again, like it's going to just turn into medical watch, 24/7, which is, again, like I jinxed it. Justin, I was, saying a week ago, like, well, really what you wanted to do all season was get to the 2 seed and healthy going in the playoffs. That's really all that mattered. Now you're probably, I don't think anybody's favoring the Bucks to get the 2 seed, even though they are still technically in that spot, but certainly I would say odds are they drop at least one slot. And secondly, the odds of being healthy going to the first round seem to be out the window, pending, some miraculous news here on Giannis. So it was the best of times, and no, it was just the worst of times. We'll see if
it was times.
It was times. So yeah, I mean, the season from hell, as you said, it just keeps on giving us hell.
I do have some thoughts on some of those things that you said. And again, there are some things from the game that we should point out as well, other than the injury that occurred. So we will get into that coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. Well, it is time to talk to you about our friends at Game Time. As look, I've talked about my frustrations being in different cities, trying to buy tickets to different venues I haven't been into, some of the issues I ran into when I was in Detroit. If I would have known to use Game Time, I would have experienced none of that, especially given that Game Time is the place to get your MLB tickets. I took in a Tigers game and had frustration after frustration using a different service. So that's where Game Time steps in to make that ticket buying experience easy, seamless, hassle-free, and it answers all of your questions. They are now an authorized ticket place of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch of any game. Also, you can see the view from your seat. Again, if you haven't been to that venue before, you may not know. It may not be like going to Fiserv Forum to see a Bucks game. So you want to see what that viewpoint is going to look like. You can get that through Game Time. They have last-minute ticket deals, flash deals, zone deals. It's easy to find and buy MLB tickets, or any ticket for that matter, in your area or wherever you are. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, you name it. It's all on Game Time. And as I mentioned, see that view from your seats. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy your tickets. Game Time will also credit you 110% of the difference if you can find a lower ticket out there. It is their lowest price guarantee. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA. Use that code for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And we remind you as well, Locked On has launched the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel. If you're running into those issues watching Fox Sports or ESPN all day and have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting, give Locked On Sports Today a try. 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all of that screaming. All the experts you can find on Locked On with the local analysis, opinions, news. It's streaming 24/7 on YouTube for free on the Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Frank, some of the stuff from the game. So I guess we should start with the actual start and the different starting lineup that we saw. So for the first time this season, Malik Beasley came off the bench. Doc Rivers talked about the rationale a little bit afterwards, and I think reading between the lines too, he really wanted the defense of Pat Beverly, but it does different things, right? It allows Damian Lillard to play off ball a little bit more. Doc talked about Pat Beverly being a guy that really pushes the tempo for this team as well. But look, I think the big thing too is we've talked about some of the issues the bench has had scoring the basketball. Malik's in a bit of a slump, and that continued tonight. But theoretically, he and Bobby Portis can be two guys that can fill it up and carry your bench scoring. but it also helps Damian Lillard in that you don't have, for lack of a better word, two liabilities defensively in your backcourt. And that's really where the problems had started to mount the most for the Bucks in this past week.
Yeah, I mean, the irony here, I mean, I think a lot of us had been saying since early in the season, like, hey, Malik Beasley as your starting two guard, like, this really doesn't make much sense, right? Like, he's not going to get tons of looks with as the fifth starter, because just there's so much of the ball that needs to be, and the shots need to be coming from Dame, Giannis, and Chris. But I mean, credit to Malik Beasley. I mean, I kind of want to come back to that. Like, as much as I was kind of always campaigning, especially early in the season, for him to come off the bench. If you look at the data, right? I've talked a lot about the three-man lineups, Giannis, Dame, Chris. The best starting lineup, the best major minute lineup in the league this year, highest net rating, the one that has started the vast majority of this year with Malik Beasley. And so, regardless of whether you want to blame it on Giannis's injury or Malik getting demoted from the starting five, that lineup will now end the year as the most effective five-man lineup among major minute groups in the NBA. And I think Malik deserves credit. I mean, obviously he's never going to be a wing stopper, a number one kind of defensive guy that you'll want to say like, okay, go lock up the opposing best player. But he embraced the challenge. I thought he got better at it as the year went on. And the starting five has had great defensive numbers. I think their defensive rating is like 107 or so. So it has worked. And again, I think obviously we want to give Brooke and Giannis a ton of credit for being the backstops to lineups that feature, Dame and Malik at the guard spots. And obviously, Chris isn't necessarily the defender he used to be, although I think we saw again tonight, he was very sturdy and I thought, did a really good job in general as a team defender, taking Jason Tatum much of the night. Jason Tatum obviously had a couple little spurts, but really was not able to take advantage. So yeah, I think the move obviously is notable, kind of speaks to the kind of desperation factor that the Bucks finally found themselves in. And obviously perhaps it would have happened earlier if not for Pat having his own injury issues here over the past week or two. But obviously it was a move that worked. And I mean, it's remarkable. Like Pat has had, I think we saw like he had some crazy stats starting for the Sixers before he came over.
Yeah.
He started when they had, they were out a bunch of guys and he put up big numbers when he started in Philly. And, again, like there's been some different circumstances for him starting games in Milwaukee, but certainly the game in Atlanta, the last time the Bucks won before tonight, he was great in that game in Atlanta, starting in Dame's spot with 18 points and hitting some runners and threes. And tonight, I mean, his best game of the season, he was the Bucks MVP. I mean, Dame had a quiet night, really did not distinguish himself. Giannis obviously would have put up bigger numbers if not for coming out with the injury. And Chris really was pretty subdued until hitting some very important shots in the fourth quarter, in addition to kind of his usual playmaking. So yeah, I mean, to throw Pat Bev into the starting five and then have him immediately pay dividends with, I think a typical workman-like defensive effort, and then giving you 20 points, 10 boards, and again, just the energy and some of the plays he made, I thought were just remarkable. I mean, that player where you just sort of drove around for a while and then threw up that running sky hook. I mean, I was literally laughing so hard, like nothing was coming out of my mouth because I like just couldn't. I was just so shocked by it that it was like silently like laughing, and that was incredible. And he hit Luke Cornett with, I don't know how many two smalls he hit Luke Cornett with, but obviously he was a huge shot in the arm in the third quarter when Boston started to make a little bit of a run. He was the guy that hit a couple threes. I think he hit a 2-pointer as well that really kind of put the Celtics back at arm's length. And obviously they got a little bit closer there at the end of the quarter. But yeah, I mean, he did a remarkable job. And, I think as well, maybe not even just like his defense against other guards, but I think the fact that the Bucks want to switch so much, and Pat is, I'd say, more switchable than Dame and Malik, just because of the physicality he plays with, and importantly also the physicality that he's allowed to play with. He's one of those guys that refs, I think, let play with a level of physicality that maybe other guys are not allowed to play with, based on his reputation and the fact that he just knows he's a habitual line stepper. He's always kind of pushing the envelope. And he obviously has earned a pretty good reputation in terms of his abilities on defense with the officials. So yeah, big shout out to Bev. They needed that from him, and I mean, this team has never needed a win more than they needed this one tonight, and to come out and lay the wood to a Boston team that, again, they don't have anything to play for in terms
Right.
of seeding or whatever. But I mean, if you're the Celtics and you see the Bucks floundering like this, Bucks, who are the team that maybe are the team that people have been looking at as like the team most likely to unseat you, I mean, you would have loved to come in here and just kill the Bucks, right? Just like
Well, and
bury them. So, I feel like that's not insignificant, right? So their pressure wasn't
no.
on them. Again, did they have like their 100% A game? Were they playing as hard as they could? Of course, this game meant more to the Bucks. They were playing with more desperation, but even though Kristaps and Al Horford didn't play, you still had to contend with a team that has shown they can win even when they're missing key rotation guys. Very unlike the Bucks in that regard, but this has been the best team in the league all year for a reason.
Yeah, and I mean, look, it obviously had a lot more meaning for the Bucks than the Celtics, but we were talking about it before the game too, in that it's too early to just start outright resting guys, but part of you wondered too, like, man, if you're the Celtics, I wonder if you would just sit a lot of guys, not just Al Horford and Kristaps Porzingis, because if you beat the Bucks with that basically backup squad, like we nearly saw them do a couple of years ago, if you do that, man, that really sends a lot of questions of, can this be fixed? And if the Bucks beat that lineup, then it's okay, great, you beat our reserves. So I was a little surprised we didn't see that. But I think, look, the frustrating part, to tie it back to the Giannis injury, is I think there's a healthy amount of respect, as Bud used to use that phrase a lot. There clearly has to be. The Celtics have been far and away the best team in the league. They were 15 games up on the second seeded Bucks coming into play tonight. You had 1-11 in the West, separated by 16 games. So it's absurd what the Celtics have done. But I don't think there's fear from the Bucks of the Celtics. And I know it's a team that beat you in the playoffs 2 years ago, and they've had your number in the regular season. But you look at those matchups, I mean, all the schedules and everything else that led to everything we saw. The third matchup, or the second matchup, I should say, Bucks were up 37 at halftime tonight when they'd been in a funk for a week. They're up by 20 at halftime. And yes, there were guys out, but those two games in Boston, you lost by a combined of 6 points. And the second one especially, you felt like, man, we really should have won that game. So I think there are a lot of reasons to point to, it's going to be a challenge. The Celtics are clearly the best team, but if that's who we match up with later in the playoffs, there's no fear here, and we think we can beat them. But the elephant in the room, the fly in the ointment is, yeah, but you need number 34 on the floor for any of that to make sense and be feasible.
Yeah, and I think, in prior years when the Bucks were, they had won a championship in 2021. Obviously Boston the next year had a really rough start, so it felt like, the Celtics were kind of always looking up to the Bucks in terms of the pecking order of contention. And then last year the Bucks obviously finished with a better record than Boston. It felt like, Boston got to the point where they did not fear the Bucks, and obviously beating the Bucks in that, knockdown drag out 7-game series in 2022. I think the Bucks obviously probably came away from that series thinking, hey, if Chris Middleton's healthy, we think we win this series. But woulda, coulda, shoulda. And I just thought game one of this season, the way the Celtics came out, it felt like Boston was like, we like playing against these guys.
Yeah.
Like, we're not afraid of Giannis. We're not afraid of this team. And it is interesting kind of seeing how the tables have turned a bit with the Celtics now as, the league front runners. Anything less than a championship is going to be a failure for this team. And so for the Bucks to not only come back in that first game and actually like make the Celtics sweat out that first game in Boston, a place that we've seen them have some pretty terrible performances, including like Christmas of last year when they got blown out in Boston. But to basically kind of come back and make the Celtics sweat out that first game, to obviously destroy them in the first game in Milwaukee, and then, without Giannis, to nearly steal another game in Boston this year. I think it's an encouraging trend, obviously, that, like you said, I think the Bucks feel like, hey, we can beat these guys, right? We can match up with these guys, and the matchups are weird, right? Because
Yeah.
of not just tonight with the big men missing. They played, like, I'd say, pretty traditional for most of the night.
Yeah.
But then we saw at times, Brooke in the third quarter, I think, was basically having to defend guards essentially,
Yeah.
like Drew or Derek White,
Derek
or
White. Yep.
whatever. Like, yeah, it got pretty awkward when they pulled their bigs entirely, and went small. But regardless of kind of what happened, the Bucks sort of weathered every storm. And I think probably the biggest difference with them missing their big guys was in that first half. I thought Brooke was tremendous. Hits five
Mhm.
threes, so of course that was a huge plus. But I thought defensively, he really controlled the paint. They shot 33% on twos. Did Boston? Bucks shot literally twice as well. They were 16 to 24 versus 8 of 24 for Boston inside the arc, which to me was the better proxy for the dominance the Bucks had in the first half. Right? You're going to have games where you hit a bunch of threes, but if you can do it inside the arc, around the basket, like that, to me speaks more to kind of a sustainable, especially defensive effort, which, let's be honest, with the paint points the Bucks have been giving up over the past week to some of these bad teams, was a big change of pace and pretty important to see. We still saw some offensive rebounding issues,
Yeah.
or defensive rebounding for the Bucks, Celtics getting offensive rebounds. And then also I think the turnovers, got very sloppy at times. But for the most part, I thought Brooke did a great job defending the paint. They were not at all concerned. Xavier Tillman was
Xavier
2 for
Tillman.
4.
Right.
He was 2 for 4 from three. Cornette was 1 of 1 from three in that first half, and the Bucks were like, fine,
Taken. Right.
we're gonna try to wall off the paint and protect, our perimeter guys in the event that Tatum or Brown get a little bit of a driving lane. And I thought they were shading well. Like the secondary defenders, I thought, were shading very well to try to dissuade the Celtics from getting the paint. And end result, Boston obviously did not do much damage in the paint. They attempted not a single free throw, which is probably maybe the most curious point from this game from a historical standpoint.
Yeah.
So again, I thought a tremendous defensive effort from the Bucks. Obviously, the Celtics didn't shoot great, but it also wasn't like the last game in Milwaukee where they literally were like, I don't know what they were at halftime, but we're shooting 10% or something like
Right.
that. It was a mediocre to bad, but it wasn't like a horrendous shooting night for Boston. I think they were like 32% or something. So that was not purely the story of this game, even though the Bucks certainly did have the better 3-point shooting night.
A couple additional thoughts on Brooke Lopez and what we saw defensively from this Bucks team that we will get to after the break. And also, you mentioned the historical numbers that we saw here. It wasn't just the free throw attempts. There was a lot. This was, to say the least, a very interesting game for a number of reasons. So we'll get to that conversation coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. This next segment of Locked On Bucks is sponsored by BetterHelp. And look, as we mentioned, sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest, big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. So today, I want to say how I really feel about something. You may be thinking about the same thing this week or the last couple of weeks. And I've mentioned this before. I do like the Brewers. I also root, unfortunately, this year for the Chicago White Sox. So don't hold that against me. But yes, that is the cross that I bear. Therapy can be different for everybody. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team or the team that we root for. And it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, Frank. History was made tonight, as you mentioned, the free throws. It was a pretty physical game that you saw early on. You saw Mark Davis associated with it and wondered, I wonder where this is headed. But very few fouls, 12 total fouls called in this game. The Bucks were whistled for 4 fouls. That is the fewest committed by a single team in a game in NBA history. The Celtics became the first team in league history to attempt 0 free throws in a game. And the 2 total free throws taken in this game are also a record for fewest amount of free throws, which, as Doc Rivers joked about afterwards, led to, I think, a 157 or 156 game time. Look, I'm all for that. If we get more of that, and as Doc has also joked, we're a team that's going to play in the mud and not in a track meet. So if you can get more of this, where we're going to let you play physical, that is something, with or without Giannis, will bode well for this team.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of glad the Bucks only took 2 free throws, just because if they had shot, 15 or something like that, then we'd be hearing like, oh, like, well, the whistle was terrible for the Celtics, right? But the fact that neither team got anything from the line, Celtics literally got nothing from the line, versus the Bucks barely only getting that one trip that Giannis had, I think spoke to just the relative even-handedness of of the whistle, and obviously the Bucks under Bud hung their hat on protecting the rim and not fouling, and doing that in combination. And hey, one thing the Bucks have done post Doc or post Bud that they weren't even able to do ever under Bud was not allow any free throws. So again, we get it. It's a it's a very difficult night, kind of not knowing what Giannis's fate is with the injury. But in terms of the game, this was obviously a great response, and in some way, it was, I think, encouraging that that Boston actually did make a run, and the Bucks faced some adversity. Right, Giannis goes out, and Boston feels like they start to get some momentum, and we saw AJ Green hit a big three. We saw Chris score, I think, about 7 points in the early fourth quarter, to kind of keep the Celtics at arm's length. And again, I think at the end of the day, they hung their hat on their defense, right? I mean, the offense was still pretty good tonight in the grand scheme of the universe, looking at the shooting percentages. But overall, this was still a pretty uneven offensive performance, taking that out. So yeah, I mean, defense obviously was what we were so worried about the first half of the season. It's what, among other things, got Adrian Griffin fired. And certainly for everything we can complain about the Bucks, I mean, I think, again, we've seen far more evidence that the Bucks can defend at a high level, at times,
good
right?
enough level. Yeah.
They're not going to be the best defense in the league. Can they be an elite defense over a 7-game series? Maybe not, right? But can they be a team that, locks in, and with a little bit of luck, in terms of opponent and shooting, can play great defense, multiple times in a series, and then hopefully, you let your offense carry the rest of the way. Again, that whole Giannis thing pending, I think there's at least a recipe there that you can defend at a level that is high enough. And obviously that's, given they didn't do anything really at the deadline other than the Pat Bev move, obviously you have to give credit to the players for buying into, I think some base cleanup that Doc Rivers and company did in terms of transition defense and trying to do better on the glass. Maybe not as evidenced tonight, but overall, it just feels like the team has shown, especially against really good teams, whether it was that Thunder game, this Celtics game, the previous Celtics game, they've shown that I think they can defend at a high level. And I think, again, just the kind of the gang tackling they did against Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum tonight, I thought was really encouraging, because certainly, like, big wings, right? You look at the Bucks personnel, big wings are not the kinds of players that you would expect the Bucks to do well against. And obviously the focus rotation wise is going to be on Pat Bev coming into the lineup. Pretty notable that Jay Crowder was, absent from the lineup and the rotation, given that Boston seems like a group that he would have to play a role against, given the likelihood that you'd want to play maybe smaller at the 5, but with enough size on the wing. And obviously, clearly, Doc felt like he needed to try something different tonight.
And I'm glad you brought up that first point too. As we wrap here with a positive, is I said this too during one of our breaks off the air. Is I know it's be careful what you wish for, but I do hope we see the Celtics go on a run here. Maybe not make it a 5-point game, but start to chip away and get this thing close to 10, just so we can see how this team responds to that. And maybe that's what you need to pull yourself out of this, and not just oh, here we go again. And this is just like the Knicks game in the previous week. And we saw that when they got it down to 11 very late after Giannis left in the third. Jason Tatum had that look at three that would have made it an 8-point game. But Chris Middleton was huge tonight. And again, you mentioned he looked better defensively. He's looked fantastic offensively since really the back half of this season, not since just coming back from that 16-game absence. Huge in the fourth quarter, and he's always had some big games throughout his career against the Boston Celtics. So that's the positive too to take from this, is this team didn't get into that woe is me and didn't get into the same old, here we go again, and wilt as the Celtics made a moderate charge. Again, we saw them pull their guys pretty early into the fourth quarter. But the Bucks are at least up to that test tonight. So now night 2 of a back-to-back tomorrow/tonight, whenever you're listening to this, against the Orlando Magic. Look, we talked about this on the previous show too, of who knows what it means. And that was when you thought you had Giannis too. Who knows what it means where you finish and who you're going to get. But you don't want to slide any further down, right? I mean, I know it's as you mentioned, likely, at least feasible, they're going to slide down at least a line, assuming Giannis doesn't play any of these 3 remaining games. The Magic also lost tonight, though. So you're 2 games up on the Magic and the Cavaliers with 3 games left. You can get that tiebreaker against the Magic. And if you do win this game tomorrow night, Wednesday night at Fiserv Forum, that goes a really long way in basically making this, the Magic are totally in the rearview mirror. Cavs may be there as well, that it's just the Knicks are the team that's most likely to catch or pass you.
Yeah, and you at least still have the tiebreaker against the Knicks because
Yep.
you have the 3-2 series lead. Obviously, huge opportunity squandered to make it a bit more academic if you had just beaten the Knicks on Sunday, but it is what it is. It could be worse, right? You could have lost to the best team in the league tonight, and then you would already be looking up at them in third place, or tied in the loss column. So we'll see. I think this game is the big one here tonight. I think, typically we've seen, I feel like over the years, like rarely do the Bucks play a meaningful game on the last day of a season, right? More often than not, it feels like things are locked in. But with just how things are bunched, and given how things have been going for the Bucks, you've got the Knicks 1 loss behind, Orlando and Cleveland 2 losses behind, the Pacers just 3 losses behind.
Yeah,
So
I was going to say, can't be ruled out either.
In theory, if you lose out, the Pacers could also tie you, and they have the tiebreaker on you. So, according to my staring at the standings right now, you are not out of the woods in terms of even the 6th seed. Yeah, which obviously dropping to 6 would be, I mean, at this
suboptimal.
point, yeah, like I'm not gonna call it catastrophic, because if Giannis is out for the first round of the playoffs, and like it's almost like, what does it matter? But obviously in the grand scheme of the universe, like, you want to keep home court in the first round, because if Giannis is going to miss any of that, you want to give yourself every advantage possible.
Yeah.
Especially with the way the Bucks have played on the road, which is, spoiler alert, not great. So yeah, this game is an enormous one. And hey, when Giannis suffered a much scarier injury against the Hawks, what happened the next game? Bobby Portis, Brooke Lopez
and Chris,
stepped up big time. Chris Middleton in his stead, and came through with that huge win against the Hawks in Game 5. So we'll see. Obviously, this is a young Magic team, which has been super impressive. And again, this is the game I'd circle. We don't know Oklahoma City what they may have to play for this weekend. They've been dealing with some injuries as well, but yeah, winning this game on Wednesday night against the Magic would be monstrous. So fingers crossed that maybe the Bucks can scrape together some good vibes here from this win against the Celtics and convert that into another win. Although, Justin, I feel like there's not a great history of the Bucks winning an impressive game against a top team and then turning around and following up with an impressive follow-up performance. Thinking back to the back-to-back against the Nuggets, where they had that great win against the Nuggets and then just completely laid an egg the next night against the Heat. So let's turn the page, Bucks. Let's surprise us in a good way for a change.
Yeah, better days. And the last part of that too is, look, as everybody is starting to worry, and I feel like I was the first to the party on this one. Of man, I don't want the Sixers. Look, we've said all along, it's going to be tough regardless. There's no easy path in the East or the West for that matter. Gone are the days of getting the Pistons and winning by over 100 points in that series. But the Sixers are not a 7th seed. And it's just like the argument last year. Oh, the Heat aren't really an 8th seed, but the Sixers really are not a 7th seed. I think they were 3rd when Joel Embiid went down with the injury. And that's the type of team they've looked like with a 6-game win streak. They're still a game back as right now that play-in tournament. So the winner of the game would play the Bucks, would be the Sixers versus the Miami Heat, which I think would have most Bucks fans just absolutely terrified. But look, they can catch the Pacers and get out of that play-in spot, which I think would be most ideal if you hold on to the 2 seed. The issue is the Pacers have the tiebreaker over both of those teams. So they're in a pretty advantageous spot to at least finish 6th, are the Pacers. But look, a lot in these 3 games to be sorted out. The most pressing of those is the status of Giannis. I don't know that we're going to hear any type of update tomorrow or in the next couple of days. It's probably going to be like it was in the Eastern Conference Finals, where it's just a lot of ambiguity. You just know it's not going to be anything immediate that we see a return from him. So I think that's the same spot that we're in. But who knows? We could be proven wrong. We'll be back once again tomorrow with the recap of another big game, a week full of them for the Bucks and the Orlando Magic. For Frank, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.